Early August 1944. Inside a forward command post in Normandy, an intelligence officer approaches the vast operational map. He holds a fresh report with the latest position of the U.S. Third Army's spearhead. He checks the coordinates, then checks them again. The new pin isn't just ahead of schedule, it's dozens of miles beyond the most optimistic projections, in a place thought unreachable for days. Looking at the impossible position, a senior officer is said to have uttered in disbelief, "Good God, he's already there." The words may be legend, but the shock was real. An army was moving faster than its own headquarters could track it.
This was the moment the brutal physics of attritional warfare, which had governed the Normandy campaign for 2 months, were suddenly suspended. This is the story of how an army broke the stalemate, and the razor-thin margin that separated this historic exploitation from catastrophic failure. The central question is, was this a masterstroke of command, or a reckless, high-stakes gamble that brought the entire Allied war machine to the verge of collapse? To understand that shock, we must go back 7 weeks to the hell of the Normandy hedgerows. After D-Day, the Allied armies found themselves trapped in the bocage, a landscape straight from the Middle Ages. This wasn't open country, it was a maze of small fields, each one walled off by ancient earthen banks, crowned with impenetrable thickets of trees and roots. For an advancing army, every hedgerow was a ready-made fortress. The earthen bank could stop a tank, the tangled growth concealed machine gun nests, and the sunken lanes between them became perfect killing zones. Progress was not measured in miles, but in yards. A few hundred yards was a good day's work, and every yard was paid for with lives. This brutal, grinding reality forged the Allied command's mindset. Strategy became a function of attrition. The plan for the breakout, codenamed Operation Cobra, was ambitious, but its geography was limited. The primary goal, as laid out by General Omar Bradley, was not a lightning dash for Paris. It was to punch a hole, swing west, and seize the deep water ports of the Brittany Peninsula. The Allies were being strangled by a supply crisis, and ports like Brest and Lorient were the only long-term solution. The plan was for a breakout, not a blitzkrieg, but on July 25, 1944, a man-made earthquake ripped across the front near St. Lo. Over 3,000 Allied bombers carpeted a narrow section of the German lines. The stalemate was shattered, and through the smoking gap they created, the very nature of the war was about to change. The breakthrough was a fact. The question was, what to do with it? The answer came on August 1, 1944. This was the day the U.S. Third Army was officially activated under General George S. Patton. Its armored divisions were funneled, bumper to bumper, through a dangerously narrow corridor near the coastal town of Avranches, a single bridge controlling the flow of an entire army. The official plan, approved weeks earlier by Eisenhower's staff, was conservative and clear. Turn the bulk of this force west, into Brittany, to seize critical supply ports. But on the ground, intelligence painted a different picture. To the east, the German 7th Army wasn't just retreating, it was disintegrating. Faced with a choice between the safe plan and a fleeting, high-risk opportunity, General Omar Bradley, Patton's direct superior, made a pivotal call. He gave Patton the green light to defy the original directive. Send only a minimum force west. Point the main body of the Third Army east, deep into the open country behind the enemy. The plan was dead. The exploitation was on. But this exploitation was not a simple cavalry charge. It was a complex, high-risk military operation, dependent on a chain of brutal efficiencies, any one of which could have snapped. The first link in that chain was a logistical nightmare waiting to happen: the town of Avranches. Here, the entire Third Army, over 250,000 men and 40,000 vehicles, had to be funneled over just 2 bridges. A single breakdown, one well-placed German artillery shell, or a raid by the dwindling but still dangerous Luftwaffe could have created a traffic jam of epic proportions, turning the packed columns into a perfect target and strangling the breakout in its cradle. The unsung heroes of this moment were not generals or fighter pilots. They were the U.S. Army's military police. For days on end, under immense pressure, they worked around the clock, imposing a ruthless, non-stop traffic control system. They designated the 2 bridges for one-way traffic, eastbound only. Every road was marked with color-coded signs, directing specific divisions down specific routes. There was no stopping. There were no exceptions. MPs on motorcycles and jeeps patrolled the lines. Their orders absolute: keep the traffic moving. Priority was given to combat vehicles, fuel tankers, and ammunition trucks. Anything else was pushed to the side. They transformed a potential catastrophe into a high-speed conveyor belt, pumping the lifeblood of an army into the heart of France. Once through the bottleneck, the armored columns unleashed a new kind of warfare, a tactic fundamentally alien to the hedgerow battles. Their orders, issued by Patton, were radical in their simplicity: bypass, bypass, bypass.
Unlike the grinding advance of June and July, the armored spearheads were forbidden from stopping to fight for heavily defended towns or German strongpoints. Reconnaissance units would identify a pocket of resistance, radio its location, and the column would simply flow around it like water around a rock, leaving it isolated. The task of reducing these pockets, mopping them up, was left to the slower, methodical infantry divisions following behind. This kept the armored spearheads constantly moving, their momentum becoming a weapon in itself. But this velocity was not blind. It was enabled by a revolutionary partnership between ground and air. The eyes of the advance were armored reconnaissance squadrons, fanning out for miles ahead of the main columns. They were the Army's nervous system, probing for open roads, identifying German weak points, and radioing back a constant stream of real-time intelligence. This allowed commanders to direct their columns away from trouble and toward opportunity. And above them, the 19th Tactical Air Command provided a second, all-seeing eye. Flying armored column cover, P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers patrolled the skies ahead of the advance. They were more than just air cover. They were aerial predators. Their mission was to find and destroy any German attempt to form a new defensive line. A few German anti-tank guns being rolled into position, a column of panzers moving to intercept, the P-47s would pounce, breaking the threat before it could ever materialize. From the German perspective, the situation dissolved into chaos. At his headquarters, Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge received reports that were, by the standards of his experience, physically impossible. American tanks near Laval, 50 miles from the front. Then, hours later, reports placed them near Le Mans, almost 100 miles deep.
His staff officers often dismissed these initial messages as panic or Allied propaganda. His command system, reliant on telephone lines that were being cut and radio messages that were being intercepted, simply collapsed. He was trying to fight an enemy that was moving faster than his own communications network could report. By the time Kluge and his staff accepted the unbelievable truth, it was too late. The spearheads of the Third Army were already hooking behind his Seventh Army, beginning the maneuver that would encircle and annihilate it. The German army in Normandy was shattering, but as the pins on the map at Schaeff headquarters leaped forward 50, then 100 miles in a day, the stunning success was creating a new and potentially more dangerous crisis.
It was a crisis not of German making, but a direct consequence of the Third Army's own incredible speed. The problem was rooted in a brutal, unchangeable fact. The Allied supply system was designed for the wrong war. It was built for a slow, 5-mile-a-day grind through the hedgerows, fed by trucks making short runs from the beaches. Now, with every mile Patton's columns drove east, the round trip for those same trucks grew exponentially longer. Suddenly, the single most critical commodity wasn't ammunition or food, it was gasoline. In the rear echelons, logisticians stared at their consumption tables with growing alarm. The numbers were undeniable. The Third Army was consuming fuel far faster than the truck companies could deliver it. The heroic charge was running on fumes. The new enemy wasn't the Wehrmacht. It was the tyranny of distance.
This crisis came into sharp focus not on a battlefield, but in the map rooms of Schaeff and Bradley's 12th Army Group. Here, day after day, staff officers moved the pins representing Patton's armored divisions. They pushed past Rennes, past Le Mans. They were approaching Chars, then Orléans, then the banks of the Seine River itself, locations that pre-invasion planners had optimistically scheduled for late September. The map, once a symbol of stunning success, was becoming a dashboard of imminent system failure. The strategic question was no longer, how much further can he go? It was, can we supply him where he is right now? The entire exploitation, the opportunity to trap and destroy the German army in France, now rested not on Patton's audacity, but on a handful of quartermasters and the exhausted drivers of a logistical network on the verge of collapse.
The greatest threat to the Third Army was no longer a hidden German panzer, it was an empty American gas tank. We returned to that officer, staring at the map. His shock was justified. The Third Army's breakout was more than a victory. It was the strategic demolition of the German army in France. By moving with impossible speed, it denied the Wehrmacht any chance to form a new defensive line. This operation proved that audacity and momentum could be as decisive as firepower, but it also revealed the fragile truth of modern warfare. An army is chained to its logistical tail. The breakout wasn't stopped by the enemy. It was stopped by the simple, unforgiving physics of supply. Patton's tanks had conquered the enemy on the ground. Now, they faced a new and implacable opponent, one that could not be bypassed or outflanked: the tyranny of the fuel gauge.